Hello, this is series 2 in my moon landing conspiracy theory debunk videos, looking at the perspective, a historical perspective rather than a scientific and engineering one. So in this video, I want to talk about the timeline of a fake moon landing, the series of events that led to the decision, if there was a decision to fake the moon landings. I don't believe such a decision was ever taken. I think it was always genuine, but I have questions that I want to set conspiracy theorists, and again another challenge. And I think it's important to know, well, to address the question: when was the decision taken to fake a moon landing? I've asked various conspiracy theorists over the years. Some have got back to me and given me their feedback. Some have sent me away with something rude, a very rude response, and most don't answer at all. So I'm going to go through chronologically the timeline, and most conspiracy theorists don't agree with each other. This is something that I hope to address in my next video about the logistics, the planning, how a fake moon landing would have been done. And this is where you find a lot of division in the conspiracy theorist community. And in fact, you get some mental gymnastics because they don't like disagreeing with each other, because that shows a sign of weakness in front of people like me and the scientist types who and the engineering types who challenge them. So you get this strange thing where they agree and then they disagree at the same time. So anyway, let's talk through this. Now, I'm going to start with the earliest time that conspiracy theorists has given me for a fake moon landing, and it's a doozy. It's an absolute doozy. This one comes from AWE 130 or 130, a Dutch-based conspiracy theorist. It could be one person, could be a group. They're quite coy on whether they are one or many. But he said 1945. This is really weird. This one took me by surprise, to be frank, because I'd never heard it go back that far. This is the decision to fake a landing on the moon was taken before the creation of NASA, before the creation of the Russian Space Agency, when both heads of the the future head of Russian rocket development and the future head of American rocket development are both under arrest. Von Braun and Korolev are both under arrest in 1945. They're held captive, and already plans are afoot to fake a moon landing when the most powerful rocket in the world can go from the islands of northern Germany to London. And already they're thinking, let's have a conspiracy to fake a moon landing when most of Europe is in rubble, and people are just trying to get through to the end of the war. So anyway, that's the doozy from AWE 130. I said, oh, come on, that's so juicy. That's so juicy. How do you know this? And he says, aha, I have information which I will share with you in the future. And he never did. Never did. 10 years ago, I asked him, why 1945? And he never got back to me. In fact, when I pressed him on it sometime later, he couldn't remember the conversation we had in the first place. So if you've ever had run-ins with AWE 130, you know that's classic from them. So the next one is sometime between 1957 and 1958, and in this scenario, this was put to me by I forget their name, but they're one of the most paranoid conspiracy theorists I've ever encountered and ever had a dialogue with. And I say dialogue in the loosest possible way. It was kind of me asking them questions and they're sort of firing back all these theories at me in a very hostile way. But in their scenario, it happened sometime about 1957, 1958, and those dates come from me. It doesn't come from them, by the way. They just said at the very beginning of the space program. So I'm thinking, well, that's about the time. NASA created in 1958, and the Russians put Sputnik 1 and Sputnik 2 into space in 1957. So in this one, the Russians and the Americans get together, and they say, well, let's create a space race. Let's fake it all, right? We'll divvy up the prize, because what we need to do, we're part of this global conspiracy to keep the people down and ignorant. And so if we get them looking to space, well, we do evil on Earth. This is their theory. The problem here is that it's not a good deal for the Russians. So I couldn't imagine Khrushchev and his minions sitting down agreeing to an American plan initiated by Eisenhower and then carried on seamlessly through Kennedy, where the Americans put forward, okay, you guys get to go to space first in very rudimentary spacecraft, and you get to put the first woman into space, and you get to put the first 3-man crew into space. You get all those ones up to, for the first few years, you get all the wins. But we get to build the really impressive stuff. We get to build the biggest rocket ever, the Saturn V, and we get to land on the moon. We get the big prize, and we win the space race, right? So, and also, your big moon rocket's got to blow up. You can't. You don't get to go to the moon in the end. Only we get to go to the moon. I can't. Can you imagine Khrushchev's Russia agreeing to that plan? Anyway. The other one is 1961. So this one is quite popular. I'd say this one and the following one are the two most popular. So the Russians put Yuri Gagarin into space, and Kennedy gets his scientific advisors together and say, look, we got to go one up. Can we go to the moon? And the scientists and engineers come back with no. And Kennedy said, well, let's fake it. Let's pretend. Now, there's a problem with this one, and that is it seems a weird goal to set, because this conspiracy theorists will say, well, there's this radioactive death globe and it's impenetrable. Well, if it's impenetrable for American side, well, the radiation belt, the Van Allen belts, are either impenetrable or they can be penetrated without people dying. If it's impenetrable, that stops the Russians from going to the moon. So you don't need that space race. You don't need to go to the moon. The space race becomes who can build a very big space station that can have surveillance devices and weapons on it, and you can threaten your opponent. And that becomes a space race. Or it's penetrable, and if the Americans are worried that the Russians can penetrate the Van Allen radiation belt and put people on the moon, well, then eventually America can do it, because America puts far more money into the space program and has better, frankly, apart from Korolev, there's some really good Russian engineers, but the American competitive system and the people they had were just slightly better in the long run, and they were more efficient than the Russians. They didn't have a lot of the political baggage and the purges and the pogroms that the Russians had. The Russians sort of robbed for their own back there. And the third one is 1967. So in this theory, the Americans think they can get to the moon, and then the Apollo 1 fire happens, and they realise there's too many problems with the system, with the Apollo system, and they're not going to make it to the moon on time. So they decide to fake it instead. Now, the problem here is that now they've got to change gear. They've got to change tack. And they've only got just over 2 years to do it. So they've got to get in a film crew. And these people have got to be all sworn to secrecy for the rest of their lives. And you now have a Black Ops division coming in. You've got all these genuine NASA engineers and scientists who all thought they were going to work towards one thing. And now they have to repurpose themselves to do another. And they don't have a great amount of time to accomplish this. In this scenario, it's easier to start a fake program from nothing within 2 years than it is to fix the problems in 2 years. Work round the clock with the best engineers you have available. And I see that as a problem. The 1967 theory is also a kind of hedge the bets thing, which is some conspiracy theorists go, well, Apollo 11 and possibly Apollo 12 are fake. But Apollos 14 to 17, they were real. Because they'd sorted out their problems by then. So maybe Alan Shepard's the first man on the moon. And that's the kind of hedge the bets theory. But those are the timelines. And I would love to hear from conspiracy theorists. Let's take a look at the history. Let's take a look at the chain of events. And not obsess over these photographs in granular detail. But think about, okay, when was the decision taken? Why was the decision taken? And what evidence do we have? Which fits with what we know? So if you are a conspiracy theorist, do comment below. Try and be nice. I'm going to be respectful. I laugh at AWE 130 because he needs it. But until then, until next time, bye.